Yeah, I'm Clara Paillard. I am a member of Unite the Union, a workplace rep and a branch secretary in the not-for-profit sector. I'm also the co-founder of a network of grassroots reps on climate justice in Unite. So this session came up as a result of some of the sector discussions that we had last year at the Troublemakers. You know, we've just been splitting up. In the not-for-profit breakout, we had about 25 people. We only had 4 this year, so we're a bit frustrated. But there was a recognition that one of the top issues in our sector was the lack of pay rises, and that this was closely aligned with a very tricky funding landscape, because a lot of us don't work for very large non-profit organizations, but actually small ones that are currently struggling with funding, and that we were like struggling to assert our rights and power to actually demand for pay rises, especially for those of us who work with vulnerable people, either it's like homeless people, people with addiction, who are in care, or facing other challenges and poverty. So we were quite interested to hear some comrades talking about their, struggle to bring a 4-day week, which, to make it very clear, when we talk about a 4-day week, we mean a reduced working week with no loss of pay. Mm-hmm. We don't mean compressed hours where you work full-time, but you just do them on 4 days. So, and the 4-day week is probably just a bit of a simplification or a slogan that we use to campaign for that reduced working week without loss of pay. But it could be a 30-hour week, It could take different shape and form depending on the workplace. So just to make sure we're very clear about what we're talking about. We did follow up with the Troublemakers at Work by an online session that I think happened in April, or was it a bit earlier in the year, where we had about 80 people attending. We had some testimonies from campaign, in particular at Shelter, the homeless charity, and also in DEFRA, which is one of the government departments for environment and rural agency, I think. So yeah, I'm really pleased that we are continuing to develop this conversation, because it's not a simple campaign and we need to connect more with different reps. So I'm really pleased that today we're going to hear from Liz and Stephen in a second. They've got about 10 minutes each maximum to talk about their experience. And then we're going to take about 20 minutes with everybody to either take questions, or also if you've got experience yourself or comrades that are doing campaign, we'd love to hear about it. And then the aim is to break out into smaller groups to have discussions about what are the challenges around this 4 days a week and how we convince the employer. And then we'll have like 10 minutes to conclude. I think we're going to start with Liz, who is online. Liz Brennan is the secretary of UNISON Cambridge City and South Cambridgeshire local government branch. And then we're going to hear from Stephen Woods, who is a tube driver and RMT activist on London Underground. So I'm really pleased to have both of you here, and we'll start with Liz.
Right, hello everyone. Thank you for inviting me, first of all. It's really, really nice to be able to come and speak on this topic. I would have liked to come in person, but I realised that coming up to Manchester and going down in a day was a bit mad. So Zoom is fantastic. So yes, I'm the branch secretary for Cambridge City and South Cambs. So South Cambs is the council who's brought in the 4-day week, and it surrounds Cambridge City, a high cost of living area, which has shared services between the two councils, one of which is...
Liz, I'm really sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry to interrupt you. You are breaking up a bit in your voice. Wondering if it's worth turning your camera off to help with the connection?
Yeah, okay, I'll do that. Okay. Right, okay, so I'll go a bit slower and then tell me if it's working. Okay, so South Cambs is a council where the pay is locally negotiated, unlike Cambridge City, where pay is nationally negotiated. So South Cambs came out of national pay bargaining quite a time ago, about 20 years ago, before I was a branch secretary, and it's one of the councils on local pay bargaining. That's quite crucial in the ability of the council to make the change to the 4-day week. So if we start on the background slide, so national pay bargaining is linked to 37 hours, and although in national pay bargaining we've tried to have a reduction in the working week, we put in a claim in 2024 for a 2-hour reduction. It wasn't accepted by the employers. So South Cambs, like all councils, and the staff have delivered efficiencies to the council and residents historically through the years, through shared services, delivering despite COVID and austerity, and not benefiting from those efficiencies previously. And like all councils, staff have felt a decline of 25% in wages since 2020. So it's not unusual for us to deliver efficiencies, but what is unusual is for us to actually benefit from those efficiencies. So the trial, how did the trial begin? It began in January 2023 for desk-based staff. And as a union, actually, it wasn't our initiative, hands up, it wasn't our initiative. We didn't campaign for it. I would never have really, it wouldn't have come on my radar to think about negotiating it previously. I wouldn't have thought we'd get it through. I wouldn't have thought about the implications. It just wouldn't have occurred to me, actually. So hands up, you know, we didn't campaign for it, but we have been involved in it. And actually, when it was announced to us, we didn't have much pre-warning. So we got off onto a bit of a rocky start because we didn't have any pre-warning. We had the details on the same day as the press release came out that the council was going to trial a 4-day week. So I started off being quite cynical because you don't get anything for nothing in local government. And my concern and my fear was that in 12 months' time, would staff be receiving the same pay as they did? But it did begin. We got involved, and on the next slide, we got involved with staff. We had meetings. We decided to follow through staff's experiences and began having in-depth interviews with staff who were particularly interested, so that we could follow them throughout the trial. So why did the council do it? They recognised the challenge of recruitment and retention in a high-cost area. There were also low staff morale and high stress. So they decided to do something quite radical and something quite different. Like I said, there was a 3-month pre-trial preparation staff for desk-based staff. And quite crucially, teams were relied upon to bring in their own efficiencies and to think about how they could reduce the way they worked by 80%, which is a huge challenge. And I think it felt like a huge challenge at first. But the way it was presented to staff was that, this is a huge benefit if you can make it work, and only, really you can make it work, and your teams know how to bring in the efficiencies, really know the things that, you know, the processes that are probably too long and could be changed. What changes would you want to see to make this work? So quite a different approach to usually what we see from management. So there was no blueprint at first, but you know, it began and staff gave it a go. So I'll zip on to, so it began in 2023, and that was desk-based staff, and there was a longer preparation period for shared waste, because there needed to be further time to bring in the operational efficiencies. So what they decided to do was making the routes more less driving, work out the routes that needed less driving, reorganising the routes to see how they could bring in those efficiencies. That's a longer bit of work, but not starting those staff, all staff off at the same time, obviously brought in unhappiness in the staff group, because one group of staff had started to benefit and the other staff were still waiting to see when they could begin the trial. But they began in September 2023. So I'll just talk a bit about the opposition, because it hasn't been a smooth ride by any stretch of the imagination. So during 2024, the Tory government kind of got on the bandwagon. There was always opposition from the Tory group within the council. And the Tory government brought in the requirements for the council to provide best value notices to the government. That meant requiring to submit 200 pieces of raw data to the government every single week about performance. So kind of really tying up the council in a bureaucratic process to prove that, you know, weren't falling behind, etc. Not only that, but then again, the Tory government consulted councils, all councils, during the finance review, asking whether councils who brought in a 4-day week should have a financial penalty imposed upon them. So really, really making it very, very difficult, stirring up opposition, and you know, just really using it as a bit of a punishment to local government and to South Cambs in particular. Okay, so wind on a bit to last year, when the Labour government came in. They disbanded the requirement to have the best value notices, and the council were then able to proceed to survey businesses and residents to have a final consultation early this year, February, March, which informed the decision taken by councillors, and the decision was taken by councillors last week to make the 4-day week permanent. Okay, so next slide. I'll just talk about the results then quite quickly. I don't know how I'm doing for time. I was going to put my timer on and I didn't put my timer on, so I'm halfway through, I'm sure. Okay, so what we know so far, the results. Throughout the trial, there were independent reports from 2 universities, Salford and Cambridge University, into the council's performance. So they were looking at 24 key performance indicators monitored by the council, and the results of those showed that between 21 and 24 of those performance indicators, had been maintained or improved, and crucially, health and wellbeing surveys of staff showed positive feedback. So there was a reduction in recruitment and agency costs. Staff turnover has dropped by more than 40%. Mental health, physical health and motivation has improved because of the drop in staff turnover and the reduction of agency staff. There's been an overall cost saving of almost £400,000 to the council. The opening hours have been maintained. It's been open for business just as it was before the trial. So staff either have a Monday or a Friday off. It's not one. So that the council is open for business, and with slightly longer opening hours for the customer service centre. 53% increase in the average number of applications for jobs, especially jobs that have been hard to fill previously. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so what have we been doing? We've been having one-to-one discussions with our staff, as I mentioned, our own branch surveys, our own meetings, and a selection of in-depth interviews to follow up members throughout the trial, follow up queries and questions with the HR project team, and support from UNISON region and UNISON bargaining support where we've needed that. And our aim at the start was not to leave any of our staff behind and to take all members' views into consideration. And we know that the experience of the 4-day week has varied. And the initial introductions and the arrangements of the trial weren't done very well. Okay, so next star. Excuse me, I'm just going to have a swig because I'm getting a bit dry. Okay, so the impacts, just a bit of practical information, the impacts on leave, etc. of the 4-day week. And just to note that obviously not all our staff began working as full-time staff. Some already were part-time staff. So although we still call it the 4-day week, technically it isn't a 4-day week for all staff, but I think Clara's covered that in the introduction. When the trial, the waste trial finished, they noticed that they couldn't deliver the 4-day week in 30 hours because it would have needed further waste rounds. I think it needed 1 or 2, and that would have brought in further expense to buy further bin lorries. But they could deliver it in 32 hours. And so after the waste trial finished, it was decided that the desk-based staff would also work 32 hours. So that is what everybody is working, but still deliverable in 4 days. On weeks where there is a bank holiday, the bank holiday becomes the non-working day. And the other really good upside is that there is no more time recording, which you know is quite a thankless task in itself, really. So it's quite liberating not to have to do that, I think. So what do our members think? Some of our staff, particularly on part-time contracts, are not receiving all the benefits of other staff due to the lack of flexibility. So some staff have felt that they had more flexibility working their previous hours, but be able to work flexi time. And for some staff, actually having an extra day a week has really helped with childcare. So it's quite a mixed picture. I think we've noticed that staff training and development must be reinforced as a core part of any role. And staff should be supported to have time alongside other responsibilities to carry out training and development, despite the reduced working hours. And some staff noted that they were prepared to record working hours if it helped to develop an understanding of the workloads. Some staff still are working some over hours, but overall they are benefiting. So I think in local councils, and particularly in South Cambs and Cambridge, there was always a tendency to do extra hours. So I think this has been a real kind of incentive for people to manage their own time, and for them to benefit from that. Okay, so I'm now on the slide of UNISON branch lessons learned. So what we've noticed from the feedback from our staff is that if negotiating for a 4-day week, I think
Liz,
yeah.
I'm sorry, Liz. I think you do need to wrap down. I was saying that a couple of times, but then I realized we were on mute, so you wouldn't have heard me saying that. So if you want to maybe like conclude in 1 minute max, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you. Right, sorry. No, I didn't hear any of the prompts. Okay, so I'm on the branch lessons learned. If negotiating, vacancies need to be filled in advance. If people are struggling at the moment to cover vacant posts, they'll struggle with the 4-day week. Take everyone with you, don't leave anyone behind. Operational services that are hardest to cover by reduced working hours. So begin with them, cleaning, waste management, street cleansing, etc. Existing part-time staff may have already taken a hit on prorated pay and will not appreciate as much benefit. So negotiate for the opportunity for them to increase to full-time hours pay pre the 4-day week if they wish. Also, a couple of more lessons. If it doesn't work for some people, it shouldn't work for any. There will be some change in flexibility, and it's important for us to be able to measure staff experience. Overall, our members have benefited from the reduction in the working week. So for ourselves, it's something that we're definitely going to promote, and we're going to encourage Cambridge City to adopt. So we'll be surveying our staff over the summer on that. So yes, that's it in a nutshell. Thank you. So, and apologies if I've run over time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. We're going to give you a round of applause.
Oh, always nice.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. That was really interesting, and to see that it wasn't a union initiative at this stage, but great that it's now been made permanent. And I think one of the things you highlighted is that it is not as easy to implement depending of how people work, especially in operational services. So I'm hoping that Stephen Intervention is going to also cover part of that, because you are wrapping the London Underground for RMT, so very challenging environment. Welcome.
Thanks, Clara, and thanks everyone for coming to the session. So as has been said, I work as a driver on London Underground. I'm a member of the RMT and of Workers' Liberty. We produce Tube Worker Bulletin. That's the longest running, still published rank and file industrial bulletin in the UK labour movement. So London Underground has approximately 3,800 drivers and around 20,000 operational workers across the entire company. I'm going to focus a bit on the pitfalls of what can be offered as a 4-day week by management and why it's essential for us as workers to have an independent position of a genuinely reduced working week and how we might go about winning it. So RMT has included the demand for a reduced working week, as to be fair have ASLEF and other unions with no loss of pay in our pay claims for well over a decade. But I think it's worth noting that until last year, it was often a rather throwaway demand, a nice idea that we stick in there. But as soon as management come forward every time and say, we're not discussing this, we immediately drop it. We don't go on about it. And it's worth saying that they've done that again this year. But so that's something we wouldn't really campaign around the membership. We haven't ever taken any action over it. But a growing body of medical evidence, I think, has started to convince people it's a serious issue. The kind of extreme shift working we do as rail workers, you know, starting from any time from 4 in the morning, finishing at 1:30 in the morning, the other side of it, and then also having night shifts. You know, it has a severely detrimental impact on our health. It increases the risk of numerous diseases. It's very bad for our diet. I am the average size of many a train driver. It has to be said. It's you know, it's not good for us, including cancer. That's one of the things that's increased the risk. We have a real impact on retiring, of people dying very shortly after retiring, you know, in quite sort of disturbing numbers. So for us, the fight for more quality time away from work, it could be the difference between good and ill health in retirement, or even life and death on the job. You know, I've only been a driver for 5 years. I've done various other jobs, but I think over the course of the people I've known, you know, 6 or 7 people in that period have just died quite suddenly. You know, not at retirement age, not old. It's just it's not a healthy lifestyle that it can lead you to doing this sort of shift work. So it's probably helpful to sketch out a little bit of the industrial landscape on London Underground. RMT is by some stretch the largest union on the job. We've got over 10,000 members, and it's the only all grades industrial union. It's the only union that represents everyone from sort of service controllers, train drivers, station staff, down to cleaners, everyone across the whole job. ASLEF have an increasingly slim majority of train drivers, and they're the only grade they organise alongside trains managers. So a much smaller union, just organising basically in that one grade. On various lines, including my own, the RMT are the clear majority. Elsewhere, the TSSA have some members disproportionately among semi-managerial grades of station staff and some back office workers, and Unite has small pockets of workers on various bits of the engineering side. So in 2024, RMT accepted a pay deal from the company without taking any industrial action. We'd threatened it twice, decided not to take it. That was a decision that many rank and file union members, including myself, opposed. ASLEF also accepted the deal, but not before claiming that they had made a groundbreaking agreement with the company in exchange for agreeing to that deal. We didn't know what this groundbreaking deal was. They didn't say anything for some time. They just said, it's groundbreaking. That's why we've accepted it. We won't go on strike. The RMT weren't included in the initial talks where the so-called groundbreaking deal was made. So we had several months of speculation about what this would entail, but it's fair to say we thought it was probably something like what would be a compressed working week. So when the groundbreaking deal was revealed, it was a compressed 4-day week with paid meal breaks. That is a big issue for us. It's something that we've campaigned around a lot. We don't get paid for our meal relief, our grub at the moment. So we've campaigned for that. The way that ASLEF presented it was this compressed 4-day working week would be good because we were paid for our meal breaks. But this entailed giving up significant elements of our existing terms and conditions in exchange for it. It would mean tying in new drivers into the depots that they're assigned to for up to 5 years, not 2. So if you live right over in East London and you get assigned to my depot in Acton in West London, you're going to be tied there for 5 years. That's 5 years of travelling over 2 hours across the city to do those extreme shifts. It would have meant increased driving time, which particularly that's an issue for us, but it's an issue for our passengers. We're expected at the moment we can drive for up to 4 hours and 15 minutes without a break. This would have made it so we're driving for up to 4.5 hours. Believe you, like after 4 hours and 15 minutes of driving in and out of the dark tunnels, up and down, that's quite tiring. You need a break. To do that for an extra half an hour that could be affected by a signal failure or further delays is something that's going to be bad for our fatigue, unsafe for us, and certainly unsafe for the people using our trains. And sort of most damningly, at least for me, it would also mean the introduction of overtime. So we're the only grade on London Underground that does not have overtime. All our overtime is because we get stuck somewhere. So they have to pay us for that time that we went over. You can't volunteer to do any extra shifts. You can't volunteer to work any extra days. On other grades, they can do that. My opinion is, and the opinion of a lot of members, in the union is that that's a bad thing. We don't want overtime. We want more people employed. So it's actually a good thing that drivers can't do overtime. We actually don't want to go down with everybody else having that route to have it. But it is popular amongst some people who, you know, want to earn more money, especially if you're trying to buy a house in London. I can understand it. But the introduction of overtime in this deal ultimately would mean a reduction in driver headcount, because if you can start covering shifts, if you can start having people come in and do more work on their supposed rest day, then there's no need to have as many drivers. So ultimately, it's going to mean fewer and fewer people on the job. Both unions consulted their members over the deal, as they've held a referendum where they got 70% support for their and management's proposal on a roughly 80% turnout. RMT also got an 80% turnout, and we had 91% rejection rate. So this means that 58% of drivers across the combine who were balloted, or legally wasn't a ballot, did their referendum, voted against the deal. So that is a clear majority. It now seems to us like both management and ASLEF are kind of half-heartedly trying to force through a version of the deal. This was a 3-year deal. They claim that they're in year 1, but the various milestones that had to be hit as part of this year 1 transition to a 4-day week, none of them have been met yet, and there isn't any kind of implementation date. But as a sort of face-saving exercise for both sides, they're claiming that they're still going to implement it, but they can't say exactly when. Given that 58% of drivers opposed it, any attempts to actually put this in will meet some sort of resistance. And ASLEF themselves, even though they had 70% of their members voted for it, that's over almost 500 members who voted against it. That's a big proportion of their membership as well. And they're worried that the slim majority that they hold across train drivers on London Underground could probably be eaten into further by RMT if they continue to do that. So there's a risk of a rebellion, particularly on manually driven lines where you have to spend much more time concentrating than you do on an automatic line where you just open the doors. But opening the doors on an automatic line also comes with its pitfalls, because that has a severe issue of underload, people not having enough to do. Very easy to be distracted, very easy to suddenly realize you don't know where you are, what you're doing, and that has also caused, you know, safety incidents. So even where it's supposedly easier to drive a train, there is a real issue with increasing the number of hours you're doing it. So we argued, RMT activists argued, that the same 35 hours into 4 days does not reduce fatigue. Longer shifts will just exacerbate that issue, making safety a bigger concern. My line, the Piccadilly line, already has the worst safety record of any part of the UK rail network. Drivers on my line pass more signals at danger than anywhere else, over double what passes on the rest of the UK rail network, because there's a lot of signals, you're manually driving it, and there's already issues with fatigue, a lack of training and things that we can get into at some other point. And on the train side, we'd had a previous trial of a 4-day week. In 2017, the Jubilee line tried a 4-day week, which saw their shifts rise to 10 hours from 8.5. That trial was unpopular and was ultimately rejected by Jubilee line drivers from both unions. And the Jubilee line has an ASLEF majority. So even where it had been tested previously, and this is a slight variation on it, it had been rejected. And that experience, I think, helped us to win the case against management's more recent proposal. What was the company's motivation? I mean, it seems that South Cambridge's is rather more altruistic. Really, London Underground wanted to do this because it's part of what they call modernisation. And both unions had previously rejected proposals to implement this on train. So by repackaging it as a 4-day week, they'd managed to get ASLEF on board. And I think part of that reason is on every other train operating company across the UK, there is a 4-day week, and they have rest day working and they have overtime. And part of that is that the ASLEF leadership want there to be a 4-day week on every company in which they represent. Some of those 4-day weeks are certainly better than what Underground were offering, and I think, unfortunately, some of their representatives, at least, basically would take a 4-day week at any cost. So those proposals, which included increased use of technology, greater flexibility with our start and finish times, and where we book on and off, were really about increasing productivity while sacrificing our working conditions. Working conditions which we'd all fought for, and in the 90s, ASLEF and the RMT had campaigned together to reduce our working week, to reduce our number of hours down from 38 to 35. So we were now in a situation where both unions had campaigned previously to reduce the number of hours we work, and now in effect they were going to increase them back and compress them. It was a common discussion in the mess rooms during those referendums with people asking, well, if you aren't willing to give up this, you're not willing to give up what's in this deal, what would you give up for a 4-day week? And I think my response and others was that we would give up absolutely nothing, because we haven't balloted for strikes, let alone taken any action. Could there be compromises to introduce a 4-day week? Possibly. But we haven't even shown that we're willing to take action for the 4-day week we want yet to find out what those compromises could be. For me, the only compromise I'd be willing to make at this stage is if they said that you can have a multi-year pay deal and we'll introduce a genuine 4-day working week. If they can say this is a 3-year transition period, maybe we can agree a 3-year pay deal if it has a real 4-day working week. But at the point that we haven't balloted, the point that no action has been taken, we're not going to give up absolutely anything. And I think it's important to get out of a mentality of what we must be prepared to give up, which is what comes up all the time. And it should talk about what we are prepared to fight for. So our current pay claim includes the 32-hour 4-day week with no loss of pay. And we should know the result of our ballot next week. And we've argued that this should be at the forefront of the campaign. If anything, the one benefit of the company's proposition is that is more people are thinking about a 4-day week, and more people are thinking actually time away from work, greater work-life balance is probably as important to a lot of us as getting a bigger pay rise. Now, lower paid members in the union, certainly they need a bigger pay rise. And I speak from a position of privilege. I'm not desperate for a massive pay rise if we can get a 4-day week, but we're not talking about that level of compromise until we've actually balloted and taken any action. To get a 4-day week, we'd certainly need to increase the number of drivers by about 500. So I think that there is a scepticism over that. And unfortunately, the ASLEF organiser, when they wrote their blog launching their referendum, they bought into that. So their organiser wrote that the reality is that a 4-day week with a paid meal relief was always going to mean compromises. The idea that the company would just give anyone an extra day off and a reduced working week at no cost by recruiting 500 extra drivers is a naive fantasy. That's something that they put out publicly to their members. As we argued in Tube Worker at the time, such a fantasy can be turned into reality if we strike, if we take action over this. So outside of the train side, activists have been discussing what a 4-day week would look like. It cannot be a one-size-fits-all. We all do very different jobs. There's going to need to be grade by grade negotiation on that. We also need to think about what it means for outsourced workers, because any deal we make will not be made for those workers who are on separate contracts. So it should redouble our efforts to get those workers in cleaning, catering, security, and areas of track protection work into our into the London Underground contract so that we can all negotiate a 4-day week for everyone. So I think the lesson of our fight on London Underground is that we have to fight for what our revision of a reduced working week is, and front and centre. We cannot accept a 4-day week at any cost. And that's very important. At any cost is not worth just accepting something that looks like a 4-day week. We need to be alert to attempts by employers to use something they will call a 4-day week as a way of making productivity savings and revoking other terms and conditions. We need to fight for our 4-day week and not theirs.